Peter Kurti, thank you for joining us.
It's a great pleasure, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Look, you've written about the dangers of cancel culture. Can you tell us what they are?
Well, cancel culture is, of course, this practice whereby anything that is deemed ideologically unacceptable by critics is removed, or attempts are made to remove it. So, for example, pulling down statues is a very good example of cancel culture. And I think there are three principal dangers that cancel culture poses, particularly for us here in Australia. The first is that I think it corrodes civility, that we end up arguing with one another, fighting with one another, and not being able to discuss in calm and sensible ways differences of opinion about our history, about the issues that confront us in society, and about the best ways of dealing with them. So the first danger is that it corrodes civility. The other danger which flows from that is that I think it threatens to destroy trust, because cancel culture sets up people in opposition to each other. It sets up people in opposition to each other, so that we no longer believe that those with whom we disagree are speaking from conviction or speaking from truth. We distrust them, and we become very suspicious of them. And the third danger is, which compounds the first two, is that it fuels discord. We end up arguing, we end up divided as a society, and we have the sense of, in my view, that sense of a common national identity, a common social identity gets threatened, because people who are determined to, as it were, erase our history, just tear down and don't put anything in its place.
What can we do about then the growing prevalence of cancel culture in our society?
Well, it's a real challenge, actually, because much of this happens on social media. And I think as people are cowed by threats of having their reputation harmed and their livelihoods traduced on social media, people are reluctant to speak out about these sorts of things. But I think what we can do, what we must do, what we need to do is, in fact, to speak out, to call it for what it is, and to, as it were, fight back. Because if we just do nothing and accept that those who argue that, for example, statues of Captain Cook have to come down, that anything that resembles, or in the view of those who are making this argument, anything that resembles a history of colonialism or imperialism or slavery has to go. Unless we speak out, that view will prevail and that view will win.
The difference between, say, America or the US, from one end to the other end to Hawaii, and Australians tend to be a lot more trusting. So the mainstream media can say what it's like, and the government can say what it likes, and we have this sort of trust. And some would describe that trust as almost being apathy, because it's like, she'll be right, mate. It's okay. Do you think that's a problem, because our interest in what's happening to this shutdown by basically the left, it can creep in, and before you know it, it's just too late?
Well, I think our national character is actually a real advantage to us. You're right. I mean, I think that we have to be vigilant, and it's important to look at what's going on in countries like the United States and now in the United Kingdom, and to see that, in fact, that kind of movement, which is, as I said, communicated often online and by social media, can come here. But I think our easygoing nature and our readiness and our willingness to accept other people and other points of view, which is, in my view, is a strong Australian characteristic, can save us and is actually very, very important. And the other point to remember is that we are, despite the fact that people who advocate, who I call them the cancellators will tell us that we are a racist and divided and bitter society. In fact, Australia is a very successful and cohesive multicultural society, one of the most successful multicultural societies in the world, and annual research over more than a decade has simply confirmed that. So I don't think that I think that our attitude in many ways is one of our great strengths, but we can't be complacent about that. And we have to speak out when we need to speak out, and we have to denounce this cancellation and to check it before it gets the better of us.
Looking at big tech and mainstream media in the US, its overt censorship of conservative opinion and its support for a particular social agenda, where do you think this fits in, and could it happen in Australia?
Well, I think we see instances where big tech in Australia does tend to take positions that are opposed to conservative points of view and tends to promote progressive points of view. And I think we haven't seen the same. We haven't seen the same sort of polarization here that we see in the United States. But I think there are glimpses of this happening. I mean, there's a lot of criticism made, for example, about the impartiality or lack of impartiality of the ABC and much of the mainstream media. And I think points of view that are unpopular with mainstream media do tend to get, if not cancelled or edited out, they do tend to get suppressed, and I think we have to be mindful of that. But I don't think we have anything like the bitter divisions that we see currently prevailing in the United States, for example.
But what about in the future? I mean, all this, I think, stems from one, the family, and secondly, the education we have in this country. I would think, without being over the top, a very left agenda in the education system, and history is sort of being rewritten at times. Do you think, though, give it say 10 years, because if these say 8-10-year-old students at the moment, when they hit 20 or hit 18, but after that they're allowed to vote, and they're allowed to also determine the course of Australia's future.
Well, you're right, and it's in some ways it's a sort of a truism and a simplistic one of that to say it all comes down to education. But in this instance, I think it does, because young people have their understanding of their place in society and the kind of society in which they're going to take their place shaped in school. And if left-wing ideology prevails in the classroom, a generation of children is going to grow up believing that Australia is systemically racist and built on slavery, and that is simply not true. So in that instance, I think it's very important that we push back and we try to get alternative points of view advanced and heard. That's not always easy. And I think it requires courage, determination, and we have to see it as something that's for the long haul. It's not going to happen quickly. I think the key thing is to spot the dangers early, and you're right about those very dangers. And once we spot those dangers, I think we can begin to do something about them. If we just did nothing, then I think that would be we would see a very poor outcome.
Christianity, probably in the top couple on the hit list for cancel culture. How do you feel about that? I mean, it just seems to be, it's very strong in the US now, which used to be a very strong Christian nation, and the Constitution is based on it. You look at Australia, where sort of Christianity, it just seems to be on the back burner, and the flame is being turned down more and more.
Well, I think Christianity is, in Australia, I wouldn't say it's under threat, but it's certainly under pressure. There's no doubt that it's under pressure. And we see a prevailing secular attitude, which, I mean, secularism is important. And I value the fact that Australia is a secular democracy. We don't want to live in a theocracy, for heaven's sake. But I think that the waves of secularism mean that Christianity is being marginalized. And we see that, for example, in the euthanasia debate. Now, euthanasia is gradually becoming legalized across the country, and Christian concerns about the deliberate ending of life are becoming muted, and it's harder to speak out. We've just seen in Victoria the passage of a bill that's now law that outlaws so-called conversion therapy. Now, no one is endorsing harmful or abusive practices that are levelled against people. But this bill, that is, as I say, is now the law in Victoria, extends to prayer and to pastoral counselling, and it means that a pastor who is asked for advice and support can find themselves liable either to a term in jail or to a very substantial fine. Now, these are examples of the way in which I think Christianity is under pressure in this country. Well, there'll be many who say Christianity has been under pressure before during times of persecution, and that the Christians need to accept that this is just part of, sometimes it's just part of the way of the Christian life. So I think we need to accept that the society in which we live is hostile in many ways to Christianity. But again, I think Christianity here is actually much stronger than many people recognize. That in the last census, 60%, over 60, I think it was like 66% of people claimed an affiliation to Christianity, whereas those who had no religious affiliation was a third, was 30%. So not even a third of Australians who were surveyed in the census had no religious affiliation at all. There are many Christians in this country, and I think Christianity is still an important part of the way in which we live. Its moral precepts have shaped our laws and our culture, but certainly it's under pressure, and I don't think we can be complacent about that either.
Peter, what about the use of social media by powerful interest groups and foreign powers to sow dissent in our society? Should Australian politicians be more concerned?
Well, I think my own view is that we don't face a genuine threat of espionage in this country. I think we are seeing levels of interference, and I think that that interference is being identified and is being called out. I suppose I'm really speaking about China here, and as the country comes to terms, as the government comes to terms with the extent of Chinese involvement in this country, there is a concern, I think, that Australia, the integrity of Australia as a country, will be compromised. I don't think that's a real danger, but I think we need to be aware of the fact that dissent can be sown by foreign agents, by foreign powers, by use of social media, by use of big tech, and that this is something that we need to be aware of. But I don't think we are under threat. I don't see that the Australian way of life or that the integrity of the Australian government is under threat at the moment. That's not to say things couldn't change, but I think there is a lot of heat that's generated by this issue, and I think the fact that it is generated means that discussion is still vibrant and speech is still free and not constrained.
Look, great conversation. We could do this more and more. I think free speech is such an important part of Western democracy, and to see that and our freedoms eroded probably deserves a longer discussion, Peter. Peter Kurti, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mike.